Hello and welcome. Today I want to do a quick little video just talking about one of the aspects of the development of Thrall that I'm pretty proud of. I'm pretty happy with how I was able to do this, and that is the random dungeon generation. So this game focuses on, instead of having custom kind of handcrafted dungeons, this game uses random dungeon generation in a bit of a unique way. It is not, I will say, it is not procedural generation. And all that means is that um, the levels are not algorithmically created. Um, there is a certain level of handcrafting that goes into the creation of these dungeons, uh, but the actual layout of the dungeons is random, and I'm going to explain how that works. So one of the first things that I do when I'm creating a dungeon is in the game system class within the script editor, I added an array called dungeon. It's an empty array, but it's something that I can access from anywhere in the game just with a simple script call. And what I do is when I'm creating a dungeon, I essentially run this code. And what this does is it accesses that dungeon array in the system, and it populates that array with smaller individual arrays that contain a map ID, an X coordinate, and a Y coordinate. So everything that you're seeing here, these are all the potential rooms that can exist in one of the dungeons, with the last one always being a boss room, or basically the last room in a dungeon, basically. And how this works is that through a script call, I access that dungeon after I've initialized it. I then take a room at random by using the rand method and going with the size of that array -1 because I want to exclude the last entry, which is the boss room. I then assign a game variable to the first value within that array, which is the map ID, another variable to the X coordinate, and another variable to the Y coordinate, and then I delete that room from the array so that you do not enter it again. Then I transfer the player to that dungeon using those variables, the map ID, the map X, and the map Y. Then, when you're proceeding through a dungeon, you will essentially run through this code. It increases your progress through the dungeon, and if you've either exceeded the size of the dungeon through whatever, if there's an error that happens where for whatever reason either I haven't created a large enough array or something goes wrong, if you've ever exceeded the dungeon size, it will essentially send you to the last room in the dungeon, which is the boss room. Or if you've exceeded the total size of the dungeon that the game actually intends. So for example, the Bloodstone Mine is a 5-floor dungeon. If you go through 5 floors, the next time you go through to the 5th floor, or to the 6th floor, sorry, it will instead transport you to the boss room. Otherwise, it will do the same thing. It will take a random room out of that dungeon array, take the X and Y coordinate and the map ID, delete the room, and then transfer the player there. In addition, it will then randomize where the exit is, and I'll give you an example of that. So when the map is loaded, it sets a variable dungeon exit to a random number between 0 and 3, and basically the exit will appear based on what that variable is. And all this really does, so within the Bloodstone Mine, it is a 5-floor dungeon, meaning you enter, you're on the first floor, you go second floor, third floor, fourth floor, fifth floor, boss room, but there are 15 maps that compose the Bloodstone Mine. And so what this game does is it creates a dungeon by taking these 15 maps, placing them in a random order, randomizing where the exit is going to be anytime you visit that dungeon floor, as well as randomizing what chests appear, what item bags appear, and what enemies appear. And the enemies are actually processed on the map itself. Basically, it just generates a random enemy, and when you defeat the enemy, once you go far enough away from it, then it will respawn into another random enemy type. So that's really all there is to the random dungeon generation. It's not overly complex. Basically, I just have 15 different maps, and the game composes a random dungeon in random order using 5 of those 15 maps, placing an exit in a random spot, one of 4 predetermined spots. Now, those x coordinates and y coordinates that I populated that dungeon array with at the start are the spawn point of the dungeon. So basically, for this one here, the map ID is 20. Say I had the player spawn here, I would have them the x coordinate be 21 and the y coordinate be 24, so that when I started this, when I load into this map, the player would spawn at map ID 20, 21 by 24. And I think that actually is the right coordinates, so let me just check here. So map ID 20, yeah, 21, 24, the x and y coordinates right there. And that's really all there is to it. You know, it's not actually all that complex, but what it does is it allows me to handcraft floors of this dungeon in a way where I can use a more detailed mapping style, and I can use a parallax mapping style, and customize the layout a little bit, while not necessarily being procedural generation. It still gives a fairly detailed appearance, but the actual way that the dungeons are crafted is quite simple. It's not actually all that difficult to do. In fact, this could probably be done in just about any RPG Maker engine with fairly little effort. Honestly, the majority of the effort that went into this is the creation of the maps themselves. These maps take quite a bit of time. If you've seen my parallax mapping series, you would know that, especially for my forest maps, these are invisible because I'm using a interesting little gimmick with this. But if you've seen my forest maps, they take on average about 3 hours to make one map. And so if I'm doing 20 maps in a 7-floor dungeon, 21 maps technically in a 7-floor dungeon, that's a lot of hours. That's well over 60 hours worth of work just to create those maps. So I mean, really, that's it. That's all there is to the random dungeon generation. It's a series of maps that the game places in a random order, and once you hit the max size of the dungeon within the game that is predetermined when you load into the map, then it spits you out into the boss room. So yeah, I mean, I didn't really want to do a super long video today. I just kind of wanted to talk about something, and this was the first thing that kind of came to mind, so I figured I'd share that with you, my design process behind that. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of flexibility that you can do with something like this. Basically all the events that are on the map, you can customize however you want. You can have enemies, you can have chests, you can have item drops, you can have the exits, you can place hidden traps on the floor. You can really do whatever you want with the maps once you're actually loaded into the map. It's just a matter of actually how you randomly construct a dungeon. I would love to try to find a way to do procedural generation, but truth be told, while I can think of a way that I could probably make that happen, the thing that concerns me about that is that typically I find that dungeons that are procedurally generated are quite a bit less detailed, unless they're made like in a AAA game studio. Like, I think of the Mystery Dungeon series, and those maps are procedurally generated. They aren't random. They are procedural. They actually are algorithmically created there as you're playing the game. Whereas a game like Diablo, I think those are also procedurally generated, but obviously far more detailed. Although I could be wrong about that. They might not actually be procedural. They could be something similar to this, but more in a amalgamated style, where they maybe have customized rooms and they just kind of place different rooms connected by tunnels. I know there is a certain level of procedural generation with Diablo's mapping system, um, but I don't know if it's entirely procedural generation. Um, whereas games like the Mystery Dungeon series, and I especially like to think of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games because those are the ones I've played the most, and was the main inspiration for this mapping style. Those are procedural, but I've always found them to be a little bit too bland. There's not really a lot of detail to them. There's not really a lot that's interesting about them, so they all kind of start to blend together and feel the same. I wanted to go with something similar, where it's more of like a maze-like network of rooms, which is actually why a lot of these maps are based on off the random dungeon generator, but are obviously heavily modified. Um, I wanted to kind of go with that similar kind of a mapping style, um, but being able to add more character and detail to the map that you wouldn't get with procedural generation. Truth be told, I don't know if I'd be able to do this level of detail in a procedural generation within this editor. Um, I could probably do something fairly basic and fairly simple, but not like this, and that's why I went with this style. So that's really it for today. I didn't want to go too crazy with this video. I just wanted to do something quick and simple and just talk a little bit about a design feature of the game. So next week I might do a video talking a little bit more about the loot system. I haven't really decided yet. I haven't really figured out a release schedule for what I want to talk about and when. The loot system is fairly complex, and I feel like it's going to take like a good hour to actually dig into that and explain that. So I'm wanting to make sure that if I create a video on that, that it is that it's organized enough that I don't go on forever talking about it. Um, so we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, that's it for this video. So have a great day. See you next time.